The research outpost on Glacium 7 was never meant to be a battleground. Tucked into the frozen wasteland of an uncharted moon, the station was a neutral ground, a place where humans and aliens studied the extremes of nature. It was quiet, isolated, safe until now. Captain Elias Cade stood at the reinforced window, staring out at the storm. Razor-sharp ice particles howled through the darkness, hammering against the station's hull. Beyond them, half buried in the drifts, was the wreckage of an escape pod. It hadn't been there yesterday. "We need to move." "Now," Dr. Mira Vasquez's voice cut through the tension. She was already suited up, double-checking the seals on her helmet. Sharp-minded, fearless in the face of the unknown, Vasquez had dragged Elias through more near-death experiences than he cared to count. Juno Carter, their engineer, wasn't far behind, stuffing an emergency med kit into her pack. "I don't know. Guys, crash survivors don't tend to last long out there. We might just be hauling back a frozen corpse. Then we confirm, report, and move on," Elias said. He turned to Rykov, their wildcard. The ex-Black Ops specialist sat in the corner, methodically checking the charge on his sidearm. "Coming, Rykov." The man smirked. "Someone's got to keep you idiots alive." They moved quickly. Outside, the wind was a living thing, slamming against their suits as they crossed the ice. The wreckage was still smoking, heat clashing violently against the cold. The hatch was open. Something had crawled out. "Stay sharp," Elias muttered, stepping inside. The interior was wrecked, panels torn loose, frost creeping over the walls. Blood smeared the floor in jagged streaks, already crystallizing, and in the shadows something moved, a figure, curled against the wall, watching them. Pale, translucent skin, eyes glowing with soft, spectral light. Her form was humanoid but otherworldly, her hair like frozen filaments shifting with an unseen current. She flinched as Vasquez took a step forward. "It's okay," Elias said gently. "We're here to help." The alien's lips parted, but no sound came. Her hands, delicate and trembling, pressed against her chest as if holding something in. Vasquez knelt, scanning her with a handheld device. "Vitals are low but stable." "She's freezing," Juno whispered. "Even in this environment, she's cold." Elias met the alien's gaze. "We're taking you somewhere safe." She didn't resist. It took time to get her back to the station. The whole way she barely moved, her breathing shallow, her body shivering despite the thermal blankets wrapped around her. They got her inside, into warmth. And then the screaming started. The alien researcher, a Yavithan biologist, had been the first to approach her, reaching out, fascinated by the find. Before Elias could shout a warning, the Yavithan's fingers brushed her shoulder. For a heartbeat, nothing happened. Then ice surged up his arm. It spread fast, a wave of crystallization, snapping through his body like wildfire. He didn't even have time to scream before he froze solid, mid-motion like a statue carved in ice. Alarms blared, weapons raised. Chaos. The alien girl recoiled, pressing herself against the nearest wall, her breathing erratic. Her eyes darted, between the frozen corpse and the crew, wide with horror. She hadn't meant to, Elias could see it in her face. But the rest of the crew? They only saw a walking extinction event. "Get her off this station," one of the alien researchers shouted, backing away. "She's a bioweapon." "Everyone, stand down!" Elias roared. Vasquez was already scanning the frozen body, muttering, rapid calculations under her breath. "It's thermal exchange," she said. "Her body operates at an extreme low-energy state. When she touches something warm, she drains the heat," Juno finished, horrified. "Instantaneous thermal entropy," Vasquez confirmed. "The molecules freeze at a quantum level." The alien girl squeezed her arms tight against herself, as if willing her body to stop doing what it was doing, and that's when Elias made a choice. Slowly, ignoring the warnings in his earpiece, he stepped toward her. Juno grabbed his arm. "Captain, don't!" He didn't stop. The alien girl looked up at him, shaking. Her whole body was a weapon, a walking death sentence. She knew it, and yet Elias reached out and touched her hand. The room went silent. She didn't freeze him. The cold licked at his skin but stopped there, like standing near an open freezer. Not deadly, not even painful. The girl stared, eyes wide in disbelief. Elias exhaled. "See?" Raykov muttered. "Well, that's new." Vasquez's mind was already racing. "This shouldn't be possible. Elias, your cells should be crystallizing. Your nerves—" And yet, I'm still standing. A tense pause. Then the alarms changed. Deep. Warbling. A sound Elias had only heard once before, an external security breach. Someone was coming. Juno turned to the control panel. Captain, we have a problem." "Bigger than the whole alien death touch thing?" Raykov asked dryly. Juno paled. "The Galactic Authority just arrived, and they're demanding we hand her over." Elias turned back to the girl. She was staring at the screen at the fleet arriving in orbit, and for the first time she looked terrified. The Galactic Authority's warships loomed in the sky like silent executioners. From the station's command deck, Elias watched the sleek, angular crafts settle into orbit. Their dark hulls swallowed the starlight, predatory in their stillness. He knew their reputation. The GA wasn't just law enforcement. They were enforcers of order, rulers in all but name. And they didn't make requests. They issued demands. Behind him, the alien girl stood motionless, her glowing eyes fixed on the tactical display. She didn't speak. Didn't need to. The fear in her expression was enough. Juno's fingers danced. Over the console. "They're hailing us again, third time." Raykov leaned against the wall, arms crossed. "You planning to answer, or just let them get impatient?" Elias exhaled slowly. "Put them through." The screen flickered. A GA officer appeared. A tall, rigid figure clad in black, his uniform pressed so tight it looked like it could crack. His face was sharp, severe, cold. "Captain Cade," he said smoothly. "You have an unregistered life form. In your possession. You will turn her over, immediately. No pretense, no bargaining." Vasquez muttered under her breath. Didn't even introduce himself. Real polite. Elias crossed his arms. "She's a survivor. We pulled her from a crash." "Site? Irrelevant," the officer said. "You have exactly 5 minutes to comply. After that, we will retrieve her by force." The transmission cut. Silence settled over the room. Juno let out a low whistle. I don't like how he said retrieve, like she's a package. Vasquez was already running calculations. 5 minutes isn't enough time to prep the station for a full-scale incursion. "Then we don't prep," Raykov said simply. "We run." Elias turned to him. "You think we can make it out?" "I think we either try or end up as bodies on the floor." The alien girl finally spoke, her voice barely a whisper. "They will not let you go." Elias met her gaze. "Then they'll have to work for it." She hesitated. Then carefully she reached out, her fingers brushing against his wrist. The cold was sharp, biting but didn't spread. She stared at him, like she was seeing something impossible. And for the first time, her voice carried something new. Hope. The escape plan was insane. Juno and Vasquez worked fast, overriding the docking. Clamps on their freighter, the Solstice. It wasn't built for speed, but it had one advantage. It was already fueled and ready. They just had to get to it. The problem? The GA wasn't waiting for their answer. Boom, the first explosive charge hit the outer hull. The station shook, metal groaning under the force. "That was fast," Raykov muttered, pulling his weapon. "They didn't even pretend to negotiate." Elias didn't look surprised. "They don't have to." The corridor lights flickered, the automated defense grid powering down. The GA had disabled their systems remotely. The boarding party was coming. Juno sealed the bulkhead behind them as they ran. "That buys us 2 minutes, tops." Vasquez threw Elias a look. "And then?" "Then we make them regret underestimating us." The gunfight was fast and brutal. The first GA squad breached near the west hangar. Raykov took point, moving like a ghost between cover, his rifle barking fire. The first soldier went down before he even registered the threat. Juno sealed another. Door behind them as Vasquez dragged the alien girl through the chaos, her breath coming fast. Elias held the line. The GA was trained, precise, but they weren't used to fighting humans on human terms. The station was full of narrow corridors, blind corners, vents too small for their exosuits. Elias used all of them. He outmaneuvered them, outthought them, because that's what humans did best. Survive, adapt, overcome. The solstice was waiting. Juno sprinted ahead, slamming her hand on the console. "Doors open, move it, move it!" The alien girl hesitated at the ramp's edge. She turned, watching as the GA forces regrouped, pushing forward. She took a slow breath, then lifted her hand. The temperature dropped instantly. Frost surged across the walls, the ground, the enemy's weapons. Ice exploded outward in jagged, unnatural formations. The GA soldiers, caught mid-charge, froze in place. Elias stared. "Huh." The alien girl turned to him, eyes glowing with exhaustion. "You are not the only one who adapts." Then she collapsed. Vasquez caught her, hauling her up the ramp as the rest of them scrambled aboard. "She's out cold, literally." Elias didn't waste time. He lunged for the cockpit, throwing himself into the pilot's chair. "Strap in. This is going to get rough," Juno groaned. "It's always rough." The solstice roared to life. Engines burned blue as they kicked off the ice, soaring into the black. Behind them, the station shuddered. GA forces trying to regain control. The warships in orbit were already shifting, turrets locking on. Vasquez's voice was tight. "If they fire, we're space dust." Elias gritted his teeth. "Not if we reach the asteroid belt first." Juno snapped her fingers. "You mean the one filled with deadly debris, zero visibility, and certain death?" Rykov smirked. "My kind are odds." Elias gunned the throttle. The solstice shot forward, vanishing into the darkness. The solstice shuddered as it tore through the asteroid belt. Chunks of frozen rock spun wildly in the black, moving at velocities that could shred their hull like paper. The Galactic Authority warships weren't far behind, their sleek silhouettes cutting through the debris, relentless in pursuit. Elias gripped the controls tighter. "Juno, tell me we've got something to work with here." Juno's hands flew over the console. "I'm trying. The nav systems weren't exactly programmed for thread the needle while being shot at by space cops." A proximity alarm blared. A chunk of ice the size of a shuttle tumbled toward them, spinning fast. Elias banked hard. The ship groaned as the asteroid scraped past, close enough to shear off an antenna. Vasquez swore. "That was too close." "Complaints go in the suggestion box," Elias snapped. Rykov leaned against the bulkhead, unbothered. "Maybe try not getting us all killed." "Noted." Another impact warning. Juno paled. "They're locking missiles." "Not for long." Elias punched the thrusters. The solstice shot forward, weaving between tumbling debris. The GA warships followed, weaving carefully through the shifting field. But careful wouldn't win this fight. Elias flicked a switch. "Juno, dump the cargo." Juno blinked. You mean the extremely expensive research equipment?" "Not worth dying over." Juno hesitated, then hit the release. The cargo bay blew open, ejecting crates into the void. The GA ships reacted too late. One of them clipped a crate at high speed, spinning wildly out of control before smashing into an asteroid. Rykov let out a low whistle. "That's one down." Elias didn't respond. His focus was locked on the girl. She was still unconscious, wrapped in thermal blankets, her breathing shallow. Ice crystals formed on her skin, melting in the cabin's warmth. She had saved them back at the station. Now she needed help, and Elias still didn't know why she hadn't frozen him. The GA wasn't giving up. Juno swore. "Second ship just repositioned. They're trying to cut us off." A lance of plasma tore past their hull, missing by meters. Vasquez flinched. "Elias, we need an actual plan." He gritted his teeth. "We can't outrun them forever." Rykov leaned forward. "Then we don't. We flip the board." Elias frowned. "Meaning?" Rykov's grin was sharp. "We take the fight to them." Silence. Juno blinked. "I'm sorry, did you just suggest attacking a Galactic Authority warship while in a field of death rocks?" "Got a better idea." She opened her mouth, closed it. "I hate that you might be right." Vasquez sighed. "Fine. But how?" Rykov nodded, toward the girl. "With her." Everyone turned to the unconscious alien. Elias frowned. "She's barely breathing." "She's also our trump card." Rykov's tone was firm. "You saw what she did back there. If she can freeze a squad of soldiers, imagine what she could do to their ship. A pause. Juno shifted. That's actually terrifying. Elias glanced at Vasquez. What's the risk? Vasquez chewed her lip. We don't know how much she can take. Using that kind of ability might kill her. Elias exhaled, looked back at the girl. Her chest rose and fell in slow, shallow breaths. She had no reason to trust them, no reason to fight for them. And yet, Elias knelt beside her, speaking softly. Hey, can you hear me? A faint shiver. Then her eyes fluttered open. She looked at him, confused, exhausted, and still afraid. Elias kept his voice steady. So we need your help. Her fingers curled against the blanket. A long pause, then barely above a whisper, I will try. The ambush happened fast. The Solstice cut engines, drifting, playing dead. The GA ship moved in, preparing for a boarding action. Exactly what they wanted. The moment the docking clamps extended, she stepped forward. The air around her crackled. The temperature plunged, and then the GA warship's hull turned white. A thin layer of frost spread across the metal. Inside, the crew panicked. Warning sirens blared. Systems failed, and then the reactor froze solid. The ship went dark. Juno gawked. Holy... Rykov grinned. Told you. Elias stared at the girl. She was swaying, eyes unfocused, barely standing. He caught her before she collapsed. She was cold. So much colder than before. Vasquez checked her pulse. She's fading fast. Elias lifted her into his arms. We need to get her somewhere safe. Juno's console beeped. She checked the readout and went pale. We have a problem. Elias stiffened. Bigger than this? Juno swallowed. That warship? It sent a distress beacon before we iced it. A pause. Then, Rykov's voice grim. Which means more are coming. Elias clenched his jaw. They had won the battle, but the war was only beginning. The Solstice burned through the void at full throttle. Behind them, the wrecked Galactic Authority warship drifted, its hull frozen solid, its systems dead. But that victory was short-lived, because now reinforcements were coming. Juno's fingers danced over the console. Multiple inbound signatures, 4 warships. ETA 2 minutes, Vasquez cursed. We can't fight that many. Hell, we barely survived one. Elias knew she was right. This wasn't a battle they could win. They needed a way out. But first they needed to keep her alive. The alien girl, barely conscious, barely breathing. Frost clung to her skin, her body shivering violently despite the heat of the cabin. Vasquez worked frantically, but her voice was tight. Her vitals are crashing. Whatever she did to that ship took too much out of her. Elias watched as her fingers curled weakly against the blanket, her glowing eyes half-lidded. She had saved them. Again. And now she was dying for it. He knelt beside her, speaking low. You have to hold on, we're not done yet. Her breath hitched. Slowly, painfully, she turned her head to look at him, and then she whispered something, a single word. Run. Running was easier said than done. The asteroid belt had thinned out, offering no more cover. The GA ships were fast, closing the distance, and the Solstice was running out of places to go. Rykov studied the sensors. They're boxing us in, we won't make it past their blockade. Elias clenched his jaw. Unless we give them something else to chase. Juno blinked. So are you about to suggest something stupid? Rykov smirked. He's definitely about to suggest something stupid. Elias ignored them. His gaze was locked on the tactical display. A nearby gas giant. A storm-racked atmosphere, thick with violent pressure currents, and an orbital scrapyard. A graveyard of ancient derelict ships. It was dangerous. Almost certainly suicidal. Perfect, he pointed. We dive. Vasquez frowned. Into a death storm? Into a death storm. A beat. Juno groaned. Of course we are. The GA warships hesitated. Their captains weren't fools. They knew what awaited them inside that gas giant. But hesitation wasn't enough, because the Solstice had already gone in. The moment they breached the cloud layers, the turbulence hit, a relentless, thrashing force. Metal groaned, alarms blared. The ship shook like it was trying to tear itself apart. Elias fought the controls. "Keep it together." Juno's voice was strained. "I'd love to, but the ship says otherwise." Vasquez's knuckles were white on the console. "Hull stress is at critical. We can't stay in here for long." Rykov grunted. "We won't have to." The big scrapyard loomed ahead. A twisted labyrinth of derelicts, shattered hulls and forgotten warships. Perfect for an ambush. Elias cut the engines. The Solstice drifted, hidden among the wreckage, silent, invisible, waiting. The GA ships followed. They entered cautiously, scanners sweeping, weapons primed. Their pilots were skilled, but they weren't hunters. And Elias? He was. He whispered into the comm, "Juno, now!" The decoy beacon activated. Deep inside the wreckage, a discarded engine core flared to life, mimicking a reactor spike. A false signal. A ship in distress, a perfect trap. The GA ships reacted instantly, moving to intercept, right into the tightest part of the wreck field, and then the Solstice struck. Juno fired the grappling harpoons. Vasquez triggered the EMP. Burst Rykov took the shot, plasma rounds slicing through weak points in their hulls. Chaos. One warship clipped a derelict, spinning out of control. Another's systems flickered, overloaded. The third tried to turn, but the alien girl lifted her hand, and everything froze. A flash of ice. Unnatural. Hungry. Frost spread across the warship's engines. The temperature plummeted. Metal cracked. Systems failed, and then silence. 3 warships neutralized, the last one running. Elias exhaled. They had won, for now. She was fading fast. Elias knelt beside her again, brushing ice from her forehead. "Hey, we did it, we made it." Her breath was weak. "Not safe." His jaw tightened. "We will be." She shook her head, barely able to lift her voice. "They will come. More will come." And she was right. The GA wouldn't stop. Not after this. They had exposed themselves, and now they were outlaws. Vasquez spoke softly. "We need a new plan." Elias looked at the girl. She had saved them, more than once. Now it was their turn. He nodded. "Then we take the fight to them." A pause. Rykov grinned. "Now you're speaking my language," Juno sighed. "Guess we're really doing this." Vasquez glanced at the frozen warships, then back at the girl. "We just became the most dangerous people in the galaxy." Elias looked down at the girl, the Iceborn. He had no idea what she was, what she could become. But he knew one thing. She wasn't alone anymore, and neither were they.